How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining me with another math lesson with Mr. Woodford. Today, we're going to continue to work on Unit 3. Specifically, if you have your packet with us, you know we're on lesson 3.5, which talks about adding and subtracting fractions, okay? Now, please look along with us. As usual, with every single video, the first thing I want you to do is begin to work on the bell work. So please begin to work on the bell work. Answer this very simple question. In order to add or subtract fractions, they must have a blank blank. There's optional word bank if you want to use it. It says common multiple, common denominator, numerator denominator, common numerator, right? Which pair of words fits these two blanks? So take a second, pause the video. It shouldn't take you too long to answer this. All right, awesome. So I'm hoping that you was able to realize that in order to add or subtract fractions, they need to have a common denominator, right? So the words common denominator is what should be filled in right here. Right now, what does it mean to have a common denominator? That means they have to have the same number on the bottom of the fractions before you add them or before you subtract them. Unlike when we did multiplication and division of fractions, when we multiply fractions, we just multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, we got our answer. When we divided fractions, we did keep, change, flip, right? We kept the first fraction, changed it from division to multiplication, and then we flipped the second fraction, right? And I want to let you guys know something. I should have mentioned it in that lesson. I apologize. But when you flip a fraction, there's a word called reciprocal, right? So that's really what you're doing. You're multiplying by the reciprocal, and the word reciprocal means to flip a fraction. So that's what we do when we divide. However, when you're adding and subtracting fractions, you actually look for a common denominator. So that's what we're going to work on today. We're going to practice that. Now, I know, once again, we will use calculators today, but I'm looking for you to show your work. Show me you understand how to do it without the calculator. You can use the calculator as an aid. I'll show you exactly how to put it in if you want to practice doing that on the calculator, but I want you to show me all the work without the calculator's aid as well, okay? Let's do it, okay? Now, the definition of a common denominator is the lowest common denominator, or least common denominator, as some people refer to it, is the lowest common multiple of the two denominators. So for example, let's start that off with understanding what is the lowest common multiple, or what you've heard growing up, least common multiple. Let's start off with this warm up. It says 6 and 9 and 3 and 12. If I were to ask you what is the least common multiple of 6 and 9, what would come to your mind? Would it be 3? Right? Would it be 18? I say those two numbers because those are the two numbers that most people hold on to. One's a factor and the other's a multiple, right? And I want you to be able to think about when you hear the word multiple, think about multiplication. Think about the number being multiplied. So 6 times 1, 6 times 2, 6 times 3. Think about that, okay? Whereas factor is the word being broken down, as you probably have heard of in factor trees, okay? But the way I like to do it is when I have to find the least common multiple or a common denominator is I first write out the actual multiples of both numbers. So 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. Let me just stop there. 9, 18, 27, 36, 45. I'll stop there, okay? Now, what is the least common multiple here? Notice I didn't go backwards. Notice I didn't say what is the least common factor or what is the greatest common factor. Notice I didn't use that word because factor means the number itself broken down to get there. I'm asking about multiples here, right? So in that case, I would say, okay, what's the least common multiple? What number do they share when you look at their multiples? The number that's the least that they share is 18. Okay, and I apologize, I kind of scribbled it out. But 18 is their least common multiple. So here the answer would be 18. See if you can figure out 3 and 12. You need to pause the video and try it on your own. That way you give yourself a chance to do it without Mr. Woodford doing it only. Okay, now I'm going to go through this 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 12, 24, 36, right? And I can stop there, because you should be able to identify quickly what the least common multiple is. In this case, it's going to be 12. So 12 is the least common multiple. Now, why do we do that? When you're thinking about adding or subtracting fractions, you got to find a common denominator. And a good way to do so is to be able to say, okay, well, Let me list out the multiples of both of the denominators to see which one they have in common. Now, there's other strategies that we have to talk about when we have to deal with these fractions, but this is the first part, finding that least common multiple, finding that common denominator. Let's dive into the modeling. Let me go through it with you. Once again, this is without a calculator. You're expected to be able to do this without a calculator on your Star 360 on any assessment I'm giving you, but you will have a calculator in this lesson. The calculator is meant to be able to check your answer. So if you want to put this in the calculator, be able to put it in as 7ABC8 plus 6ABC5. Hit enter and it should give you the exact answer. Same thing for B, 8ABC16 minus 5ABC8. Now, just because you got the answers doesn't mean you're done. You know, I know since the first day you entered my class, I'm expecting to see your work. And if I don't see your work, you won't get any credit. So the best way for you to do this is say, okay, great, I know what the answer is. Let me prove it by showing my work, okay? Let me prove it or justify my answer by showing the work. Now, 7 over 8 plus 6 over 5. The first thing I want to talk about is what is the common denominator here? What is the common denominator? Because our goal is to rewrite these fractions as something over something plus something over another thing, right? That's our first goal. Now, in order to do that, we have to figure out what is the common denominator between 8 and 5. If you want, you could begin to list your multiples like 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, right? 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, right? And I kind of skipped a little bit of numbers there, but you understand, right? And you'll notice here that the common denominator here is 40, right? That's the one that they have in common, nothing else, 40. So I'm going to put 40 down here and 40 down there. Now, I want to point out something before we go any further. Notice that their common denominator was 40. Yes, I listed out all the multiples, but what other way could I be able to find 40? What is a quicker way to find the common denominator? If you're thinking about just multiplying the two of them, that is a good technique. Some of these problems that you're going to do, you can quickly just multiply the two denominators and you'll have the common denominator, right? Others, you'll have to actually list out the multiples like we did, just as a hint to you, okay? Now, what we're trying to do is change 7 over 8 to something over 40. That is our goal. 7 over 8 needs to become something over 40. But we need to ask ourselves, and I'm just going to erase the multiples over here, okay? I know if you wrote them right there on your paper, you won't be able to erase them. So I apologize. Maybe write the multiples down here. That's what we'll do in the next problem, okay? I want to say, okay, what multiplied by 8 to get me 40? That was 5. So since I multiplied the denominator by 5, I have to also multiply the numerator by 5, and I get 35. Now, what multiplied by 5 to get 40? That was 8. So I'm going to multiply that numerator by 8. Notice that they're not the same number that I'm multiplying. Everybody see that? 6 times 8 give me 48. That's a 48 there. That's a 35. Okay. Now that I have them written out, now what I want to do is say, okay, great. They have the same denominator. Now I can add them. Notice I didn't try to add anything from the beginning. Notice I didn't make this answer 13 over 13. Notice I didn't do that because it wouldn't make sense. You need to have a common denominator. So with the common denominator, I'm able to say, okay, now this was really 7 over 8 is equivalent to 35 over 40. Listen to what I'm saying. 7 over 8 is equivalent to 35 over 40, while 6 over 5 is equivalent to 48 over 40. Right? Does that make sense? 6 over 5, you know 6 is bigger than 5. Is 48 bigger than 40? Yes, it is. Okay, so we created our common denominators. We have these new fractions. Now we can add them. We ask ourselves, okay, well, what is 35 plus 40, plus 48? What we end up getting is 83 over 40. Okay, 83 over 40. Now, for some of you guys, you're like, well, Mr. Wilfred, I don't like this improper fraction. Can I turn it into a decimal? Our last lesson, you talked about making sure we can change it from fractions to decimals. I'm gonna be honest with you. I like fractions some days. I like decimals some days. Yes, the last lesson I like decimals. This lesson I like fractions. Leave it as a fraction in simplest form. What does that mean? Put this in your calculator, 83 ABC 40. 83 ABC 40, hit enter. It should reduce the fraction if it can be reduced. Now, this particular fraction, I'm gonna be honest with you, it cannot be reduced because 83 and 40 have nothing in common. 83 is an odd number, so you can't even divide it by 2, okay, without getting a decimal. So we're going to leave it as 83 over 40. Or if you want another way of writing it, I will accept 2 and 3 40ths. Okay? This either the improper fraction or the mixed number, either one is okay with me. Okay? Wonderful. Now let's quickly go into B. Now B, once again, we are subtracting. So when you got to remember, when I add or subtract, when I add or subtract fractions, I need a common denominator. What is the common denominator here? So let's list the multiples of 16. 16, 32, 48, right? And I probably can go one more. Let's go one more to 54. Now let's go one more. Let's say that's 7. Okay, great. These are multiples of 16. Let's do the multiples of 8. 8, 16, 24. Do I have to go on? I could. But you and I should both be able to recognize right away. Hold on. The common denominator, or at least common multiple here, is 16. I want to create brand new fractions where 16 is going to be my denominator. Now, notice here, when we look at the first fraction, we say the common denominator is 16. 16 times what gives me 16? Times 1. So that means 8 times 1 needs to be just 8. We can leave that first fraction alone. However, the second fraction is where we need to think about, okay, well, what do we do? How did we go from 8 to 16? What do we do there? We multiplied 8 by 2. So also multiply the numerator by 2. And we get this. Now, when you deal with subtraction, I want you to pay attention to what I did also. And I guess I should have highlighted it with the first one. So let me highlight it over here. Notice here that both of these denominators are 40. Did I do 40 plus 40 and get 80 on the bottom here? No. I worked so hard to make that common denominator that I made sure the common denominator stayed in my answer. Also stay in my answer even if I made it a mixed number. So when I look at B, what should my denominator be of my answer? Should it be 32? 16 minus, should it be 16 minus 16 should be 0? No, it's going to stay 16 because that was the common denominator I worked hard to get. But I am going to subtract the numerators. Just like here, I added only numerators. Here, I'm going to subtract the numerators. So what is 8 minus 10? If you need your calculator, put 8 minus 10, sure. If you want to write the circles like we did, the counters and unit 1, that's fine. If you want to use absolute value and do keep change and 8 plus a negative 10, that's fine, right? But you should know that this answer is going to end up giving you a negative 2. Okay? Now we're looking for a simplified fraction form. I love this fraction. It's great. I'm glad you got it as a fraction rather than a decimal, but put it in your calculator. Negative 2 ABC 16, or remember how to simplify fractions. They both can be divided by 2. Divide them both by 2. You end up getting negative 1 over 8. So our answer here is negative 1 over 8. When we do 8 16ths minus 5 8ths, we get negative 1 over 8. Okay? This is what we're working on today. Now, I noticed, just if you notice in this unit, I started with multiplication and division. Why did I do that? I did that because I believe you're stronger in multiplication and division than you are in addition and subtraction, especially with fractions. Fractions are going to even throw it even, it's going to make a bigger impact on you. It's going to be a bigger curveball. Take your time. Find your common denominator. If there were steps, these would be your steps. First, find your common multiple of your denominators. Write them out. Find what the common denominators, then write new fractions with that number on the bottom. Don't forget to write the sign. If it was subtraction, put subtraction. If it was addition, put addition in the middle. Okay. Then think about, okay, well, the first fraction, how do I get this denominator to be this? What do I multiply that denominator by to get this new denominator? Multiply that number by that numerator. Perform the same exact kind of step with the second fraction. After you did that, now you have your new fractions properly created, right? Then you either subtract or you add, leaving the denominator the same in your answer. Afterwards, you can reduce it by putting it in your calculator or by dividing by 2 until you can't divide by 2 no more. All right? So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me with another math lesson with Mr. Winford. I will talk to you all later. Thank you so much.